My name is Gary Johnson. I am the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Hastings College. This is my first year, as well as it is for many of you, I imagine, and it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker. Before I do so, though, I'd like to welcome you all to the first-year program Hastings College Faculty Lecture. As many of you know, Hastings College is implementing a revised first-year program called Connections. As a result of this new program, we want our students to see connections between their individual courses and the academic disciplines that they represent, between the curricular and co-curricular aspects of college life, between faculty, students, and staff, and of course, between all of us. Our first lecture will be delivered by David Lovekin. Dr. Lufkin was professor of philosophy and chair of the Religion and Philosophy Department at Hastings College from 1987 to 2012. He's author of Technique, Discourse, and Consciousness, an Introduction to the Philosophy of Jacques Ellul. He was also editor with Donald Philip Varenne of Essays in Humanity and Technology. Lovekin has published numerous essays on Ellul and Giambattista Vico that deal with technology as a problem for philosophy of culture in the spirit of Ernst Cassirer, with the idea of technology as a symbolic form. His most recent essay, Looking and Seeing, the Play of Image and Word, the Wager of Art in the Technological Society, is forthcoming in the Bulletin of Science, Technology, and Society. Lovekin is a contributing editor of the Ellul Forum and serves as a member of the International Jacques Ellul Society. He was a recipient of 5 National Endowment for the Humanities grants. His photography has been published in numerous books and periodicals. Lovekin's most recent work appears on covers of the Prairie Schooner, the literary magazine of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and in the Modern Arts Midwest Midtown Gallery in Omaha, Nebraska. He is currently translating, with Michael Johnson and Samir Younes, Jacques Ellul's L'Empire du Non-Sens, The Empire of Nonsense, for the Papadakis Press of London, and for which he will provide an extensive introduction. The title of today's lecture is On the Liberal Arts, Tradition as Measured Change. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lovekin.
I probably should have a warning. There are no visual aids here, so if any of you need a visual fix, you might want to keep your phones or iPads available. There won't be any images, just words, and I would invite you to think and imagine along with them. Again, thanks for the chance to do this presentation, which is a paper that is intended as a companion piece to an essay I did for the Lilly Foundation, first volume issue, The Liberal Arts and the Life of the Spirit. So I'm continuing my exploration of the liberal arts, which really for me is my life. And again, I'm going to read some from this paper. I'm going to ad-lib from it, and there's no empty chair to talk to, so I'll eschew that bit of nonsense. I'm not about to explain the liberal arts, but wish instead to explain how they explain me, and perhaps you. I believe I'm mostly speaking to entering college freshmen, or at least to those who are freshmen at heart. Be wary of sophomores. The word means wise fool, perhaps you know. And that indicates that after the first year of college, students think they know something. If higher education does anything it teaches after at least 4 years, that you know practically nothing, but that you know this now more clearly and in specified ways, the ways of the liberal arts. From this experience, you will have achieved what I would call Socratic wisdom, which is no given, but which requires divine labor. I will state right now, Socratic wisdom involves knowing yourself and then getting over it. This, as I will show, means knowing what you know and what you don't know. This knowledge is the basis of the liberal arts. I begin. I went to the University of Dubuque on a football wrestling scholarship, largely to avoid work, but also to become a high school biology teacher like my wrestling coach, who was my hero in high school. My first year convinced me that I was done with football, what I came to see as violence interrupted by committee meetings. I didn't mind the violence, it was the committee meetings. And coaching platitudes like, they put their pants on like you do, one leg at a time. I wondered if the coach was able to think about the size of the leg in the pants, but I couldn't decide. He could never get my name right. He kept calling me Lufkin. Hey, Lufkin. Well, I noticed an older man hanging around the football field after practice, talking to a number of players who often frequented what I found to be his office on the second floor of the dorm in which I lived. I was curious. I discovered he was a philosophy professor. I asked him what that was, and he gave me 2 books, Plato's Republic and Jean-Paul Sartre's The Age of Reason. I read both of them and understood nothing, absolutely nothing, nothing. For some reason, I thought it would be good if I could understand them, that I'd be better off. And so, this is absolutely true, I transferred to Northern Illinois University, declared myself a philosophy major. My mother was aghast. I had no idea why. It just seemed right. I did know, I got a sense, that Socrates, some ancient Greek, was the main character of the Republic, and that he argued with a bunch of people, confusing them and me. But I thought it was grand stuff. I would soon learn that one of Plato's maxims was that philosophy begins in curiosity, as does a passion for the liberal arts. I would learn much later that behind this curiosity was a desire to connect with my past, with the past of others, and to a tradition that explained the present in need. Consider the proliferation of gadgets like the iPhone, the iPad, with phenomena like MySpace. We are awash in narcissism and what I will later call bullshit. I'm not just being potty mouth. Here's a book, I highly recommend it. It's in our library. It's called On Bullshit by Harry G. Frankfurt, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Columbia University. He's also been on The Daily Show too, which is something I'll talk about later, because I think if you want to understand Socrates, you just watch Jon Stewart and you find out what the Platonic dialogues are really about. Anyway, I'm opting for a Wii phone. Wouldn't that be interesting? A Wii pad, not the iPad. iPad would be useful for, I think, the upper 1%, right? People with a dog on the car roof, but I don't know. Anyway, you are living as perhaps never before. Well, I'm sorry, I forgot this. Bullshit, as we'll see, I intend to discuss it, is a blatant disregard for truth at all. This is very interesting. The bullshitter will use the truth if it benefits him or her. The bullshitter will use falsehood if it benefits them. It doesn't matter. The point of bullshit is to make a favorable impression. That's the whole business of it, which is, well, never mind, we'll get to it. No wonder many of you consider self-identity a pressing problem. You are living, as perhaps never before, in a space of self-confinement masquerading as absolute freedom. You are free to blog, to text, to shout out how you feel to a reporter casting about for opinions and feelings about a great variety of matters with no question of authority or authenticity. Who could really be satisfied with the freedom to say anything at all to an audience who would be interested in what may be mere blather? Wikipedia says it all, which boils down to whatever. But each of us, I believe, wants and desires more. Why the liberal arts may still flourish, as they have done for me at Hastings College for the last 25 years. Here I was able to connect, beyond me, however, and to the great republic. I want to make something difficult simple rather than to make simple things even simpler. I'm really tired of presentations like that, treating you as if you're morons. Don't do it. Anyway, the setting for the republic was the Greek port city of Piraeus, 4th century BCE. Socrates, Plato's usual main character, is invited, threatened really, to a wealthy man's house to discuss the meaning of life, but mostly to discuss the meaning of money. Socrates, here a young man, asks a variety of questions and gets many bad answers, but that is, answers that end in contradiction. Here are some samples. What is justice? Doing what is appropriate. What is that? Helping friends and harming enemies. How do you help friends? Keep their money safe. Money is useful? Yes. Do we then render the useful useless? Pause. Is it ever just to harm anyone? Pause. What if you can't tell your friends from your enemies? Another exchange. What is justice? What is in the interest of the ruling class? What if they don't know their interests? What should they be interested in? Socrates suggests that they should be interested in the interests of the ruled, but his colleague thinks that self-interest of the ruler is enough. Beyond the exchange is the notion that human interest should be in a knowledge that takes one beyond oneself. The metaphor of music arises. Noise is not music. What is needed is a knowledge of scales, of tuning, of listening, of harmony. Once again, knowledge takes one beyond oneself. Knowledge goes beyond opinion, which is mere self-assertion. And if merely self-interested selves came together, discord, cacophony, and chaos would likely result. Socrates wonders how that could be just. Suppose we are on the playground wanting to play marbles. Suppose someone says, the game will get better if we give all our marbles to Bob, who will then return them to us many-fold. Bob, of course, might leave the playground to hoard the marbles at home with the intent of raiding other playgrounds with a person championing the good as a matter of giving up marbles. Trickle-down marbles presupposes a goodwill on the part of those wanting the game better for all. Doing what is appropriate depends upon much consideration. All we learn in the first book, which I've just described, Book 1 of the Republic, is that most people, likely the reader, indeed included, have never thought about things like justice beyond the platitudes of their occupations or their social, economic, religious stands in life. Of course, a wealthy person involved in banking and making weapons would think justice a matter of lending and weapons manufacture. Of course, someone involved in teaching the sons of the wealthy would think justice would be a matter of obeying a despotic ruler whom the teacher would like to keep in power out of self-interest. Self-interest, Plato thought, was too narrow if the self was narrow. Bob should want to do more than take people's marbles. The soul, Plato continues in the Republic, like the state, is divided. The state is divided into rulers, soldiers, and workers. The soul into reason, spirit, and appetite. They're directly parallel. Each should do what is best for each nature. Workers should build, and appetite should consume. The soldier or guardian should constrain. The spirit should direct. The ruler should know what path the state as a whole should take, just as the soul should seek a knowledge that goes beyond the opinion of spirit or appetite. Drinking to drink invites drunkenness. Confining to confine and punish leads to abuse. But reasoning should determine how much drink or how much constraint is to the good. But how do these ideals work? How are they enacted? Plato is convinced the path lies in education, which means for him to lead out from. Plato's view of the soul of the Athenian state had become corrupt, losing a war with Sparta, spending itself to poverty by fostering an untenable empire, and by choosing Socrates as a scapegoat for all the social ills. In the Republic, Socrates is a young man. Now we move to Socrates as an old man. He's awaiting his punishment. In 399 BCE, Socrates is called to Athenian court to defend himself against the charges of impiety, not believing in the city gods, and of corrupting the youth. In his defense, he cites his friend Chaerephon, who had visited the temple of Apollo at Delphi. In answer to the question, who is the wisest of all Athenians, the oracle apparently said, Socrates. If this was true, Socrates stated, in the words of Plato, which I paraphrase, then my wisdom is in knowing that I am ignorant. I know that the gods alone are wise. Socrates then allowed that he had gone around Athens seeking a wiser person, but had found none. The scenario that I've just summarized would be an example of Socrates' search. This must be what the oracle meant, Socrates claims. I know that I am ignorant and that others think they are wise when they are not. That must be my wisdom. This included Socrates' accusers, which did not strengthen his case with him, but made the case for Plato and subsequent philosophers, and I believe makes the case for the liberal arts. Socrates further argued that he would be unable and unwilling to corrupt anybody or any institution because he had no dogmas to impart, and that if corruption meant making something or someone less just, then he would not want to live with the results of that labor. The labor of the liberal arts, I contend, is essentially philosophical, which means the loving of wisdom. To love wisdom is to know that one doesn't possess it. It's good to see some people are out having their visual fixes like this. Keep it up. On the temple walls of Apollo were inscribed, Know thyse utan and maiden Agon, or Know thyself and nothing too much. By the way, if you know the Matrix, you may know in Volume 1, Neo visits the oracle and is reminded that above her kitchen door, Teme Noske, or nothing too much, know thyself, occurs. So, unfortunately, the know thyself does not mean also not knowing the limits, not knowing of nothing too much. From the ancient words, I still learn, as likely did Socrates. And my wisdom really consists in knowing myself, which is knowing who wants to know by engaging the process of knowing. This involves inevitably knowing the limits of knowing. I do not know in a vacuum or know in no place. My knowing takes place in a culture, in a universe, under the stars. Knowing is situated, and knowing this knowing is part of knowing. Knowing involves, thus, knowing what, when, where, how, and why knowing takes place. These used to be the watchwords of responsible journalism, categories which came from Aristotle, but that's another matter. Self-knowledge would oppose the pride of self-absorption and would instead brace a profound humility, which is, I think, the desire to connect. In the Phaedo, we find Socrates awaiting his death, which has been postponed for a month. During this time, Socrates explains to his friends that he does not fear death. The soul is immortal, he contends, because he knows eternal things. Things like numbers, geometrical shapes, principles that the false could never be the true, and that the equal could never be the unequal. These eternal truths could not be known through sense experience, which is tied to the body and to perishable truths that are mixtures of the true and the false. We can add up numbers improperly, he contends, but the real 2 added to the real 2 would always equal the real 4. We can be mistaken about what is true, but not mistaken that the true, if known as true, could not be the false. Socrates concludes that he, like a swan, sings most beautifully near death, and that philosophy is a training for death, for a time when the soul leaves the body to visit the realm of eternal truths or forms. But backing off from any ideology, I mean, one could easily contest there are no eternal truths and explain, of course, how one knew that. But anyway, Socrates says, whatever, maybe my ideas are wrong, but if they are, they die with me. But in any case, if I'm right, he says, I move to a better place. And at worst, I have spent a very pleasant time with friends doing what I have always loved, which is thinking and discussing ideas in time, pursuing the beautiful, the true, and the good. Maybe they don't exist eternally, but it's still fun looking for them, you might put it in those terms. Reading Plato, and perhaps reading any text, we're forced to realize that we'll never really know what Plato meant, what the real Socrates or any real author thought or said. Words are at best signs and indicators. Even the words we think are right are never fully understood. Did we mean to think that we might kill George if he does not shut up? To say that we hate those who we really do not or could not know? I follow Plato, or at least the Platonic-inspired author, in the famous seventh letter. In this letter we find, for this knowledge of the truth or of the forms is not something that can be put into words like other sciences, but after long continued intercourse between teacher and pupil in joint pursuit of the subject, suddenly, like light flashing forth when a fire is kindled, it is born in the soul and straightway nourishes itself. I now believe that Plato's case was the case Socrates could have made to answer the charges of impiety and treason, which would establish the true university built around the liberal arts. Only true knowledge was power, Plato thought, and such knowledge came through knowing that we did not know, a knowledge seeking an absolute, but with provisional outcomes. In other words, instead of the true, we have to settle for a truth. When Socrates said that he knew nothing, perhaps he knew that nothing was not a thing or a particular. Knowledge of things begins, he thought, in their appearances as indicators of the true, the beautiful, and the good. The appearances of these are flags marking the beginning of the race. The virtues of courage, wisdom, temperance, and justice would only be possible if each portrayed a harmony in which each had their place. Courage wisely enacted could not be foolhardy or cowardly. Temperance would know what to do at the right time in the right place, knowing the wisdom of nothing too much. Wisdom then would involve all kinds of knowing. And then Plato lists them. He's already been examining poetry, he's been examining language, and then he, after the famous myth of the cave and the divided line, adds arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. These complete for him what the training that will properly tune the soul would provide. We find this list to be the basis of the entire Republic that purports to discuss justice and the type of soul that would make justice possible, which requires training and tuning with an education that included all of the above. This program of knowing would produce and sustain justice. the fourth virtue that would bring about a just state. The Republic, or on my reading, the liberal arts, begins in this sense. Socrates says that the problem of justice or knowing begins when the soul realizes it lacks something. This, of course, means that the soul possesses at this point humility. The soul is not wrapped up in pride, which is another term simply for self-absorption. Pride is not only the deadliest of sins, it makes almost doing anything impossible. It makes even being prideful impossible. To be prideful, others have to allow you to get away with it. We know that Plato tried his hand at politics to educate a tyrant in Syracuse, which didn't turn out well. He was imprisoned for a time and nearly executed. We have reason to suppose that his political pessimism in the Republic, that a state would never be just until philosophers became rulers or until rulers became philosophical, was squashed with the execution of Socrates. I had a history professor who said that the age of reason ended in 399 BCE. We do know that Plato formed a group around 385 BCE. He called them the Friends of the Forms. In academia, a suburb north of Athens known for its olive trees. This, of course, was a sacred place and invited many forms of religious worship. It also gives us the word academy, from which our system is based, or on which it's based. We know that the forms, or ide, E-I-D-E, and our ideas of them have Platonic weight. We also know that the great philosopher Aristotle was his student for some 20 years, that he was said to have educated Alexander the Great. But beyond that legend, he wrote on nearly every subject that would provide nearly the totality of Western knowledge as taught in universities or institutions of higher learning well until the 18th century. Talk about measured change. That doesn't mean, of course, that these subjects were simply accepted, that these subjects were simply pro forma, but these became research projects, which I think is what the liberal arts is. In fact, I'll say right now, I think the liberal arts is a mentality and a disposition. I don't think there could be any courses in the liberal arts. I think that would be like majoring in majoring. I think that what's really important is to embrace 2 or 3 of the liberal arts and then define how they connect. That going deeply, by the way, into any one will lend you or lead you straight away into the other. There's absolutely no case where that's not true. I'm in Lincoln with my friend translating Jacques Ellul's critique of modern art, and suddenly I come upon a phrase in French. And translating it literally means order and corpuscle. I mean, what the hell, order and corpuscle, what can that be? So I get on the phone and call my colleague Jim Dugan, because the guy he's writing about's an op artist, and that somehow he's experimenting with wave and particle theory. So suddenly I find a new way to translate that word. That's the way everything is. When you get into something, you find you need somebody else to supply another perspective. That's the liberal arts. Our tradition of the liberal arts grows out of a work of an African lawyer, Martianus Capella, written sometime in the 5th century CE in an allegory entitled The Marriage of Philology and Mercury. I have it here. This is it. And what's really interesting is the translators apologized for translating such a boring work. It's just absolutely incredible. We're sorry to present this to you, but after all, what else could we do? Well, what else could they do is about right. I mean, this work in the 4th century is still being considered and discussed. It's not only the basis of medieval education. There's good evidence that many students were condemned to learn it by heart. But in the 17th and 18th century, Leibniz was still producing a new edition of it, and Copernicus used a chapter of it to buttress his account of the Earth-centered universe. I mean, what an extraordinary work, and something that has so much influence. It's absolutely astonishing. So when I heard these words, "This is so boring," I decided I'd better read it carefully. I don't play well with authority sometimes. So anyway, this is my take on it. We begin with a story where Mercury is deciding to marry. He thinks it would be a good idea. He consults Virtue and Apollo, who suggests that philology, inasmuch as her wisdom was comprehensive, would be a great match. To prepare for her wedding, for which she will become immortal, she has to cast off useless things like ordinary garments, and in preparation for the heavenly ascent to Mercury, she vomits forth a great variety of books. I mean, this is just like Bridesmaid, right? You get naked and throw up. So anyway, I thought, what the hell? That's the story, though, that introduces this. Mercury sends 7 maidens to clean up the mess. These maidens, of course, are the liberal arts. They're the ones that are going to order the vomiting of books. And at this point, eloquence and Mercury conjoin with wisdom. Here's the list. In order: grammar, dialectic, which he means logic, rhetoric, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and harmony. These are clearly the lists that Plato was working with. This work had an enormous influence. I won't go through all this. I decided, there's no way you can understand Dante's Commedia without understanding and reading this, and without reading the commentaries by Macrobius and by Bernardus Silvestris, 2 of the major commentaries of this work, which powered the whole business. And of course, also, if you want to read C.S. Lewis's science fiction, you need to be very well versed in Macrobius's commentary. So anyway, what fun. Let me discuss them, though, in perhaps a different way. Grammar, dialectic or logic, rhetoric became the trivium, or I think in the Latin would have it trivium, wouldn't it? I always feel uncomfortable with that. And music, and arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music would become the quadrivium, or 3 ways and 4 ways. We would understand these divisions to divide the humanities from the natural sciences. Grammar, from the Greek gramma, meaning letter, included the study of both Latin and Greek literature, as well as language proper. And in the Middle Ages, it consisted of studying literature as well, studying poetry. Logic, as it did for Capella, began with affirming Aristotle's 3 laws of thought, which still guide some of us today. Something is what it is not what it is not, and is either what it is or what it is not. And from this, some of you studying logic would be interested to know that the square of opposition was taught as well, all in Capella's works. So you learn Aristotle's 3 laws of thought, the square of opposition, which is a primitive computer. You assume one statement's true, what about 3 others, and work them through. Rhetoric maintained its place as the study of the arts of persuasion, deeply indebted to Cicero and Quintilian, arts which are still taught in modern composition and public speaking. The ways of the trivium dominated the medieval mind, which aided the occupations. I mean, the medieval university was a trade school for law, the clergy, and medicine. And but arguably by the 12th century, a concept of nature was construed that separated nature from the ways of the gods and God, and considered it as having its own reality, however divinely dependent, and the quadrivium flourished. As noted above, the natural sciences and humanities became quite distinct from the 18th century on, which then continued to evolve. Grammar by the 20th century would include structural linguistics. Logic would embrace modal logic. Rhetoric would be involved in sociology, anthropology, political science. The social sciences would scramble for a place between the trivium and the quadrivium. The natural science division would expand and interpenetrate with physics, biology, biophysics, etc. Here we have a separation that would have been known as natural philosophy. Arithmetic, geometry are no longer taken as divinely inspired, but are seen as useful forms of language to support the other sciences. Nature increasingly is viewed as machine-like. The vast changes invite encyclopedias of information. Nonetheless, a modicum of measured change remains. Wherever there is humanity and individual self, there is need for self-expression. Language. Language, of course, divides. The minute I say now, now is then. The minute I say anything at all in any language, I divide myself into speaker and spoken. Language is inherently social. There is no such thing as an individual language, and a need to make sense, to embrace in some measure the laws of logic and skills and persuasion of reasonable worth. The house, for instance, is either burning or not burning, and you should leave. That makes sense. One could say, to split a difference, that the house is smoldering, leaving the problem of exit momentarily problematic. Nonetheless, grammar, logic, and rhetoric are reaffirmed. As some of you will soon find out, you will need to convince a prospective employer of your worth, bringing these arts again into play. And in our technological society, there could be no argument for the needs of measure, however much they have become more sophisticated to include transfinite mathematics and statistics. Perhaps, though, there is need for less measure on the grounds of nothing too much, or on the consideration that not all admits of measure, like love, but that would involve argument, discussion, definition, and so forth. The liberal arts are always conjoined. To my philosophical mind, most discussions return to Plato on the question of knowledge versus opinion. Argument presumes standards of argument. One can't argue without them. If one is allowed to contradict oneself, no sense is possible. Truth can never be merely a matter of opinion, a mixture of both true and false. The true would have to be the true, Plato thought, and opinions should strive to become true, was his message, in line with Socratic wisdom. For instance, how many of you think truth is in the eye of the beholder? Raise your hand. Truth is in the eye of the beholder. Raise your hand. Oh my God. Not the majority. I can't believe it. I mean, were you all to say it, I could say, well, no, you're wrong, and then be right on the grounds of what you've given me. So you see how that works. I guess you could say truth is in the eye of the beholder if you knew what was in the eye of the beholder, other than your finger. I don't know. Anyway, this is not to play games, but this is to say something important about the liberal arts. Opinions should reach for facts. I think this is important. I spent a long time writing and rewriting this. Opinions should reach for facts, and facts from the Latin factum are made. This is the business of language, which always works to the degree that words confirm common opinion and judgment. Words should correspond with facts, however they are determined: sense experience, authoritative study, library consultation, etc. But each of the liberal arts has a play in constituting facts. The basic element in physics used to be an atom. Now it has moved to the quark and beyond. You can do this in each of the disciplines. In geometry, it was verboten to claim parallel lines intersect, but now in non-Euclidean space, they do, they come together. like lines on a basketball. This does not mean that the prior facts were wrong, but merely that they were supplanted. They are still true in their way, and these ways should be noted, because once we know how they were justified, they make sense. The earth from the naked sky of the Nebraskan still looks flat, although now we know better. Truth is not now relative, merely a matter of opinion, but is a matter for the various kinds of knowledge we can bring to bear on the subject and on the problem. I have slipped in what philosophers would call the coherence theory of truth, as opposed to the correspondence truth. Plato believed it was crucial to teach the rational mind that the gods were not ungodlike, that they would not lie, would not appear other than they are, but he knew that such things were taught by people he called rhapsodes. These were the dramatic interpreters, the actors of the dramas, or in our days, these would be the televised talking heads, others curiously maintained as pundits. Pundit, by the way, originally meant a Sanskrit scholar. It's a long way away from Bill O'Reilly, I would guess. Liars, as Plato noted, still had a regard for the truth, and thus the truth survived. The investigator's job was to dig the truth out. But we are currently in a strange cultural place that would have puzzled Plato to no end. I turn now to the study of philosopher Harry G. Frankfurt. In a near bestseller, On Bullshit, Frankfurt claims that lying and misrepresentation are out of fashion. By the way, his follow-up book on truth I don't think was read at all, but people did want to learn about bullshit, which is also sad, I think. And in fact, if you did pick up that book, you'd find that it's not an easy business. It's full of fairly long, complicated studies of Max Black. Anyway, politicians and pundits may in fact lie, but the lie is not the issue. Truth or falsity are no longer the concerns. Lying or telling the truth are both permitted as long as a favorable impression is achieved. Recently, Rick Santorum claimed that the elderly in Holland had to wear bracelets to keep from being euthanized. This, by the way, I was just in Amsterdam, and they thought this was a hoot. Of course, there were no facts to back this clear falsehood, and likely no concern for the truth that might substantiate it or negate it. Whatever, doesn't matter. Romney made a statement that was challenged, remember this? And he allowed that he didn't recall what he had said, but he was sure that he would stand by it. I mean, let's quit calling this flip-flopping. It's bullshit. That's what it is. It's not flip-flopping. There's no dignity to it. There's not even the dignity of lying. It's not that either. Not enough respect for the truth. That's what I'm claiming is going on. And that's what we can gain from the liberal arts in whatever way we can grasp it. And each of you will have your own projects, and I hope you embrace them. And I hope you embrace those projects as paths to the truth, as the true, and not confuse the true with the truth. I'm done.